Alright, so now it's time to actually get in and start blocking out our Previs character. Now, if you'll remember, I am using this reference of a hero female character that's about 8 heads tall. And this reference had been based on many of the techniques set by character designers of old. So, let's build that head first and then go from there. Now, this is probably going to be one of the few times in this video series that you see me use the extrude tools with the modeling toolkit, because I like to keep my Previs modeling as simple as possible. But let's just introduce some of that to you now. So, first of all, I'll create a cube. Oh, my cube came in at the wrong settings because my old cube thing here was set up for the old settings. So I'll just make sure that my new settings are correct, and I will add this cube back to my shelf by holding down Control Shift, and that should be there. So there we go. Cube comes in at the correct size. Now if I go to my orthographic front view, I can then jump this up, and if I want this head to show up on a midline point, I'm going to need to create some more grid points for myself, and I can do that by going into Display, Grid, Options, and I'll just change my subdivisions to 2, and that will add grid lines at the halfway point for each of my cubes. I don't mind that so much because I've got my reference cubes here to show me the width and size of this character's head space if they're going to be 8 heads tall. So here is my character's head roughly in position. Let's drop a smooth on that. And we are also going to change our reference to template for now, just so it's not in our way. And I'm actually going to modify the shape of this head slightly so that it looks a little bit more skull-like. And that's probably the most modeling I'm going to be doing, besides duplicating and scaling things. So I'll go onto the side profile. Well, actually, let's take a look at our reference real quick. Okay, so reference-wise, we've got this this head that is more narrow than it is tall. So that's my first job, is to bring these vertices in, make it all a little bit more narrow. And it's quite wide in the side there, as you can see. So it's about as wide as it is tall, so I'm not going to touch that too much. As mentioned in the previous video, I would like to introduce you to the Inner West, where we have planes flying overhead every 10 to 15 minutes, especially after 10 p.m. Next step is I want to bring up the back of the head there to be, again, a little bit more skull-like. So I'll grab these vertices at the bottom, bring those up, and I can bring the vertices in the front of the face here all the way forward. So I'm starting to create this profile shape. Now, I'm quite happy to not worry about too much detail here, but I do want some even facial proportions. So I'm giving myself a nice flat line to work with, and if our eye line is about halfway the height of a cube, then the mouth line is about half that again, so it'll be at about a quarter down on that cube. Let's just bring that up as well. Okay, so we have the eye line, we have the mouth line, and the last thing I want to do is just drop that chin down. So I'm just going to grab these two faces at the bottom, and I'm going to be extruding those down and scaling it in to create the chin shape. Now I can find that by going to, well, I can find the extrude tool fairly easily by going to Mesh Tools, and Show Modeling Toolkit, and that's my modeling toolkit here, where you are going to find tools most used. And you have a custom shelf that you can add things to as well. You can see that I've already added a bunch of the tools I've been using so far. Let's just delete some of the old ones I had added so that we can add them fresh as we go. Now you can drag stuff down to your custom shelf here just by middle mouse dragging. So I'll middle mouse drag my little cube and a shelf up there. Middle mouse drag my sphere. And middle mouse drag my cylinder, which is going to come in weird. Yeah, it's going to come in way too big. It's because I set up my settings incorrectly in the first video. I don't know if you caught that. I errantly had us creating cylinders twice. So let's fix our cylinder right now. And right now it's coming in quite large. So let's drop that all down again to half measures once more. Still fairly large, but at least it's easier to scale and work with. So we'll go create polygon cylinder, and I'll just add that to my shelf. And once again, I will middle mouse drag that down. Okay. Cool. Alright, so here's our modeling toolkit, and the extrude tool is what I mentioned before that I would like to use to bring the chin of this character down. So to access those faces, I just right click and hold on the character model and go face. And I hold down shift to select multiple faces at once. And when I click the extrude tool, it gives me some options to extrude local and Z right away, but really I just want to use the move tool to just pull them down automatically. Now, right away I'm going to scale those in and bring them forward and tilt that up. And honestly, I could probably use another scale. So let's just see what that looks like. It's pretty squat for a head still, so I'm going to bring that in just a little bit, but we don't want to bring it in too much. So you can see here we've got the width of 2 heads there, and she's just sitting on the inside of the halfway mark. And that profile here, you can see that that chin line's tilted up a little bit, so we've tried to capture that slightly. And there we have a very rough shape that looks a little bit more head-like than our sphere did before. Okay, head done. Let's move on to the torso. Now once again, let's go back and check our Loomis measurements. So torso-wise, looks like we get the top of the shoulders are about 1/3 of the way down, a head measurement beneath the chin, and the widest point of the chest is a full head length away from her head. So let's just create that top shape first, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so I'm a huge fan of reusing things. So let's once more, let's bring our reference cubes back so we can see what we're doing. Let's bust out our cube, drag that up, and we will smooth it once again. And this is a very nice shape for, say, the tops of shoulders. Now it's currently far too small. So if I look at her chest, so you see the width of her chest is, it's just under 2, so it's probably about 1.5 heads. Let's take a look at that. So if I were to say scale that out to just maybe 1/3 of a head. I'm looking at the second headline here and where her shoulder blade comes out. So maybe just at that point. And I'm actually going to be crazy here and just delete the faces at the bottom so that I'm only looking at this upper torso part, and I'm not getting confused by everything else. Okay, so the furthest width of her torso is down here at the second headline, and the height of her torso is just at that third of a headline, which is where it is now. Now in side view, her torso is at the widest point as wide as a head measurement, but at its most narrow, well, it just becomes softer as it goes. Let's go to side view now. And the widest point is appropriate, and the top is actually quite narrow as well, so that's okay. I'm quite happy with how that looks. Now, I can actually see what we need to do for the bottom of this torso. Okay, so comes down to now her waist is at the third head mark, but her rib cage ends significantly before then. So at about the probably the mirror image of the top of that rib cage, so probably just 1/3 of a head from the hip point. So let's actually, the easiest way to do this is to just select that mesh and go to Mesh, Mirror Geometry, Options. Now if I set my Mirror Geometry options to mirror in the negative y-axis, as in it's going to mirror below it, and hit Apply, you'll see that it's just created, well, the mirror image of that geometry and connected it to that mesh for me as well. So this is roughly the proportions of my torso, and the last thing I'm going to do before I move on is you'll see here that her torso is just slightly tilted back. So the shoulders are slightly tilted back so that they're sitting just below the ears, whereas the bottom of that torso is sort of tilted forward, so it's sitting just below the chin. So let's actually do that now. I'll just create a slight tilt on that so that we've got the base of the torso coming forward and the back of the torso tilted back. And this is going to start creating that S-curve in the spine that is so crucial for a character being able to bend over and manipulate objects. Alright, so let's then get our waist happening here. Okay, so let's create another cube. And once again, let's smooth that cube. And once more, pop it up into position. Now where does the waist go? So her waist is thoroughly at that third head point. So it's right there in the middle, as is her belly button. And we will keep this vertex exactly where it is to act as our belly button in days to come. So let's move this forward. So you can see her waist is, well, in that model, it's significantly more narrow, and I don't think this character is anywhere near that thin. In fact, looking at this now, I think her rib cage could probably stand to be just a bit more wide. Okay, so now my character, if you remember in the reference, is just a little bit more stocky. So let's add a bit of, just a slight bit more, a bit more of size to the waist there. So I'm just going to increase the waist by about 1.25 in the x-axis, and that creates a abdomen that tapers but doesn't taper too much, and it gives us a point where we can start seeing where our hips are going to come in and connect to the rest of the character. Okay, so at this point I would really like to have some shoulders. So her shoulders here actually come out quite a bit further than I've got in my model so far. So I'm just going to scale those out a little bit, create a little bit more width. And I think it's possibly safe to go just a bit further. Now, let's get those shoulders into position. Where are those shoulders on this character? So, the shoulders come in, and it looks like they start, as we've said so far, about a third of the way down of the second head point. And the widest point ends just before the bottom of that second head point. And you're gonna get so sick of cubes by the time we're done with this. But really, no, you won't. You're gonna love them. They are the greatest thing in modeling. Well, I'm sure many people will argue that point. Okay. Let's bring these up. And I like to have my shoulders be about 75% the size of the head cubes that I use. And as in the image, where the bottom of that shoulder shape just touches the base of that second head measurement, we'll do the same thing here. And I'm quite comfortable having the edges of my shoulders touch the edges of this 2 head width mark. So I will just go back in the perspective and check to make sure my shoulder is in roughly the right position. Now I'm actually going to jump ahead to the elbows, and then I'll add the cylinders in between, because it's actually the shoulders, elbows, and wrists that give me the most information when I'm laying out my proportions. All the cylinders do is connect things. That's it. So let's just duplicate that. Well, first let's find out where the elbows are. Okay, so your elbows are generally going to be found at the same point as your belly button. And that's going to be the case with most characters that you do proportional reference for. So let's pop that to the belly button and just bring that right out. Of course, we want to bring it underneath the shoulder. And if the shoulder was 0.75, let's make the elbows about 0.5. And hers are slightly higher than the belly button, so we'll just bring this up slightly higher as well. But the base of that elbow is definitely on the same line as the belly button. Okay, let's move that out so there's just a bit of breathing room between her elbow and her waist. And move it back slightly so that there's a bit of a bend in her arm, which you'll see is very important once we get into the rigging videos. Okay, upper torso is starting to get blocked out. Let's start bringing in some of our cylinders and duplicating some shapes across. Okay. Let's go back to our modeling toolkit. Bust out a cylinder. Scale that guy right down. And bring it up. Here we are. Okay, so I could just leave it as this totally stocky, chunky cylinder and have that, call it a day. But what I'd like to do instead is just give this a little bit of shape. A bit more to resemble, there's a natural curve in the neck that I would like to emulate, and I can use the multi-cut tool to do that. So my multi-cut tool is here in my modeling toolkit. Anytime you can't find that again, try just clicking on one of the tabs here on the far right of your UI, or you can get that under Mesh Tools and Modeling Toolkit. So the multi-cut tool, if I hold down the control button, you'll see that it gives me, and I'm still holding it, it gives me this little indication as to where my line might be if I were to let go. So if I let go now, or if I click, bam. So if I click and then let go, here is my little line of vertices, which I can just move forward slightly, creating that bend. This also means that I have that line of vertices holding the shape of the neck, and you'll see that Well, she has what you can imagine is a line of vertices holding the shape of her neck here, but the neck flares out where it meets the torso, creating these muscles to either side. So let's just simulate that by scaling those vertices out side to side. And now we're creating some somewhat weird shapes, so let's work on that a bit. I think we can afford to potentially scale this out slightly as well. So one thing we can do is if we just sort of rotate this whole thing. There we go. We're getting more of that S-curve happening. And let's rotate that whole thing and scale it in this direction as well. Ta-da! Simulated neck cylinder. Now again, that's probably the most modeling we're going to be doing with these characters. I've even gone too far. I took it too far. There we go. Cylinder for the arm. Much more simple. It is wider at the top than it is at the bottom. And how do you know how wide it is at the top and the bottom? You just look at the spheres on either side of it. So let's just get that into position. Make it quite a bit smaller and quite a bit taller. Rotate that. And again, we want to rotate that cylinder so that it matches the fact that we've had her elbow moved back. Okay, so I'm judging the size of the cylinder roughly based on the sphere below it, which means the cylinder at the top needs to be wider to match the shoulder above it. That's wider in just the one direction, and I will make it narrow in the other. So it's wider from the side and more narrow from the front. Just to kind of hint at the musculature, but not so much that you can accuse us of actually modeling during the Previs cycle. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. Once you actually start modifying the vertices on anything, you actually want to just keep modifying the vertices until you've modeled the whole damn object. So stop, she tells herself. Okay, let's duplicate these objects over to the other side, and this is where we're going to add the final most used tool to our shelf here, which is going to be the duplicate special. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set all of their pivot points first to duplicate across from the belly button here. So I'll just hold down D, hold down V. That lets me snap every single one of their pivot points to that belly button. And I'll go up to Edit, and what I want is Duplicate Special. So I'll just create the tooltip for that now. Now if I go Duplicate Special Options, usually at default the settings are all very boring. 1 for 1 for 1, which means it would duplicate right on top of itself. But if I say want to have these this arm piece is duplicated across the x-axis to show up on the other side in their mirrored position, I would just change that scale value of 1 to -1 in the x. For those of you who haven't used this tool a lot, the first column is always x, the second column is y, and the third column is z. So I'll just set that to apply. The reason why that all jumbled out of shape is because if I open up my channel box here, you'll see each of these has some transform information on them. So if I were to select all of those and go to Modify, Freeze Transforms, and Edit Delete by Type History, and then Duplicate Special again, which I've just added to my shelf there, you'll see that they all show up in the right place now. So that's just a note for yourself. Whenever you duplicate special and something shows up somewhere where it's not supposed to, chances are you've got some history on your object that needs to be cleaned off. Okay, so we've got the upper body done, roughly. We need to do the lower body, and you'll notice I haven't bothered to do the forearms and wrists yet because I need that lower body as reference for where those wrists are going to be. So we'll do all that in the next video.